Hello everyone, Paisley here, and welcome to my Beginner's Guide to Civ 7 video series. Now, today's topic, I want to talk about something I get a lot of questions about, and that is buildings. Specifically, people want to know, where should I be putting down my buildings? Well, to answer that, we're gonna have to go over a few things. In this video, I've broken it down into 3 parts. First, I want to talk a bit about the terminology around buildings, such as types and tiers. Secondly, I'll go into adjacency bonuses and what that exactly means. And then thirdly, I'm going to talk about strategy and how to leverage this knowledge to do better in Civ 7. Now, for those of you that don't know me, I stream Civ 7 and I have almost 1,000 hours into the game, and I'm a deity level player. So this guide is for both people completely new to the series and for those of you that are maybe more casual players and want to advance to deity as well. So the first thing we need to address is, what exactly is a quote-unquote building? Now for this video, I'm going to be using map tags a lot because I think it makes things really clear. And actually, I'm going to link below all of my mods, and I highly recommend you download every single UI mod I have because it has really improved my experience with this game. So you see here, there's a category called buildings. There's wonders, which you should be familiar with if you've played previous Civ games. But then there's something new here called improvements. So these improvements go on rural tiles, but you need to have already been working the rural tile. So for example, it can go on top of a farm, and it works very differently than these buildings you see up here. They don't have adjacency bonuses, they're ageless, you can build as many as you'd like depending on the exact type of improvement, and these are not what we're talking about today. Instead, what we're talking about today are these 3 rows. We can break this down into 2 categories. The first is the warehouse building. So that includes your fishing quay, your granary, your brickyard, saw pit, and harbor. Warehouse buildings provide bonuses to rural tiles like the farms I was just talking about. So for example, a granary gives +1 food on farms, pastures, and plantations. So it's important to note that these don't actually get any bonuses on themselves. They provide bonuses to external tiles. Okay. Now these other 2 rows you see here, these are buildings that get bonuses by being placed next to certain terrain types like mountains or coast or resources. And therefore, it's really important to know exactly where you're placing these buildings to get maximum adjacency, which we will talk about in part 2. The other distinction that is important to keep in mind is that the warehouse buildings are also ageless, meaning their abilities do not go away upon age transition. However, the other buildings, let's say the aging buildings, do actually lose their adjacency bonuses on age transition. However, they do not lose their base yields. So for example here, the library has a base yield of +3 science. You get to keep that. You will lose the +1 science for each adjacent resource and wonder. So let's go a little bit into the different types of buildings. You can use the color code of the map tags to get a hint of where this is going. There are food buildings, production buildings, gold buildings, science buildings, culture buildings, and happiness buildings. Most of these buildings will have 2 tiers. So for example, the library is a tier 1 science building and the academy is a tier 2 science building. The difference is usually in the base yield, but also in the production cost. You also unlock buildings, and you'll sooner unlock your tier 1 buildings and then later will unlock tier 2. For example, the library is in writing and the academy is not until mathematics. So it's going to be a long time before you unlock both tiers of certain types of buildings. You may have noticed there are 3 gold-coded buildings and 3 happiness buildings. And that's because in every age, there's a unique one-off type of building. Here, it's the bridge. It's not exactly a tier 1 gold building, nor a tier 2 gold building. It's something on its own, and you can build it on navigable rivers, and it allows a unit to move over a river without having to embark. The other kind of unique building here is the altar. This doesn't actually work like the other 2 happiness buildings, which get adjacency bonuses from mountainous terrain. The altar doesn't. However, the altar unlocks your pantheon in the antiquity age. The third unique kind of building you need to keep in mind is your palace. And this is because there's one really important ability your palace has, which is that it gives +1 culture as well as +1 science for each adjacent quarter. Now, The term quarter refers to when you place down two buildings. So, for example, if I place down my library here and then my barracks here, that will create a quarter. This is an important term to keep in mind because certain wonders or certain abilities will interact with this concept of quarters. So, for example, Colosseum will give you +2 happiness on quarters. So, that means if I just have a monument here, it will not give me +2 happiness on the monument, but it will give me +2 happiness on this quarter here. A single building creates a district. So if you see the word district, for example, in Axum's ability, you get +1 gold on districts. That means a single building or a 2 building tile is also a district, but it's not a quarter if it's only one building. Hopefully that's clear.
Wait, how could it be a 2 building tile?
Well, basically, Dr. Crow is asking me, how could 2 buildings create a district? And that's because the ability of Axum, for example, doesn't go away when you make a quarter, even though it says +1 gold on districts. So it's still a district if it has 2 buildings, but it's also a quarter. Just think about that whole rectangle square thing. Okay, so this is very different from Civ 6, where you would have a culture quarter and then you would build the next level building in that quarter. Here it's giving you a lot more flexibility on how you plan your city, but I think this has tripped up a lot of newcomers to the game because it seems complicated. However, once you get a handle of the terminology, it is quite easy to memorize what exactly goes with what. And that's because adjacency bonuses come in 3 types. So for example, your science buildings and your production buildings get the exact same type of bonus for adjacencies. So you see here +1 production for resource and wonder, and here +1 science for resource and wonder. So you can mix and match as much as you want. However, you will usually want to put your science and your production buildings together. Your food, which gets +1 food for coastal terrain, navigable river terrain, and wonder, and your gold buildings like the market together. So actually, if you look at the map here, coastal terrain, this is the best coastal terrain tile I have next to my palace. And then the best resource tile I have that I can see so far is just +1 resource. So I'm going to put my barracks and my library here. And then thirdly, you want to put your culture, which gets +1 culture for mountainous terrain, natural wonder, and wonder with your happiness buildings, which gets the exact same thing, but +1 happiness. So I have 1 mountain here, meaning I want to put my monument and my arena here. And just a reminder, your warehouse buildings, it doesn't matter where you put them. So you can first plan everything else and then see where you have room for your warehouse buildings. Now, just a reminder, your adjacencies do go away on age transitions. However, in every age, you will unlock different science and culture or whatever buildings, and then you can overbuild your previous era buildings and then sort of get those adjacencies back on the newer buildings. But that does mean you get to keep your base yields. And so there is sometimes a strategy of not overbuilding. You want to, for example, maximize your science. So you keep your older buildings because you maintain those base yields and you find a different place to build your next age science buildings to maximize the amount of science you can possibly get. The other thing you need to know about adjacencies is that it is affected by specialists. Now, specialists are a population type when you grow your city that you can then pick a district to put a specialist inside, and they will get a base of +2 science and +2 culture, and also a +0.5 adjacency bonus. So it's really, really important that you place your buildings with maximum adjacency bonus that you can possibly find, because later on, the more specialists you put on that district, the better your science and culture is going to be, because really you should be prioritizing science and culture when placing down specialists. So for example, a specialist on the library I've placed down here will also get 0.5 science because of the 1 resource. A specialist on my palace, if I build all 6 quarters around it, will actually get 3 science and 3 culture on top of whatever else bonus your palace is getting. So let's talk a little bit about strategy. One thing I think beginners don't realize is that you need to chain urban districts together. So for example, I have my monument and my arena placed over here by the mountain. However, I don't have any districts planned next to my capital. And unless I do that, I cannot build over here because every urban tile needs to touch another urban tile. The exception for that is wonders. I could place down, for example, Gate of All Nations here, and then if it's a link between a chain, it can act like an urban district. You can place wonders wherever you would like. They don't have to be chained to buildings. So I could place Nalanda over here without having it connect to any urban districts on its own. The exception to that is, for example, Gate of All Nations, where its requirement is that it is placed adjacent to a district. But because the palace gets bonuses to quarters, you should never be placing wonders next to your palace. Think of it like the government plaza of Civ 6. The same is true here. You want to be placing quarters around the palace. So one strategy I like to use is using my warehouse buildings to extend my urban tiles towards better yields. So I need to get to this mountain. I can place my granary and my brickyard to make a quarter next to my palace, but also to extend to this mountain and then put down my monument. Another tip I have is then to place your third warehouse building with your altar, because neither of these are going to be getting adjacency bonuses. So placing them together to create a quarter next to your palace is a great way to add +1 signs and +1 culture early on. The third tip I have is this concept of early on. So, like I said, you do not get your library and your academy at the same time. So, it's really important to not plan them together, except in certain rare circumstances, because it's going to take a long time for you to finish this quarter next to your palace, therefore losing that +1 culture and +1 science that we've been talking about. Instead, it's better to mix and match types that synergize with each other to more quickly finish a quarter. So for example, your barracks is actually unlocked here in bronze working, so not that far from writing. And then your monument, for example, is unlocked just before your villa. Your garden is unlocked at irrigation, and then your market is unlocked here at currency. Tier 2 buildings you can see are here in military training is your tier 2 arena and blacksmith. Your amphitheater, which is the tier 2 culture building, is over here in engineering, is just going to take much longer to unlock. The fourth thing to keep in mind are some restrictions. For example, the bath can only go on river terrain. So it can't go here on this rough terrain, but it can go here on this river. It includes minor and navigable. And then things like the fishing quay and the harbor can only go on coastal terrain. And then later on, you're going to unlock the lighthouse, so that can go a little bit further away. And you can actually place down a building on your palace quarter. So you can put your villa here, but there's really no reason to, because getting the quarter done faster is much better than ever putting down a building in the city center. There's really no reason to, unless, for example, you have nowhere to put your bath and this is a minor river and you could do that. One thing to keep in mind is that a quarter will become obsolete if they have non-ageless buildings. So for example, the market and the garden here in the next era will be obsolete and will no longer give my palace the +1 science and +1 culture. However, the granary and the brickyard are ageless and they will continue to give benefits to the palace. So it's really important to try to place your warehouse buildings around your palace so that you don't dip in science and culture on age transition as much. When it comes to these outer rings, you want to start planning your tier 2 buildings. So for example, your amphitheater and your villa can go here, and then you want to think about wonders. Strategically try to place wonders around your science and your culture buildings, because again, those are the two most important yields in a game. So for example, I have an incense here, meaning I can get a +5 science building here. If I place it here, it's still +5 science, and then in between I can put down a wonder like, well, this is desert terrain, so I can put down Petra. And then this Petra will give adjacency to all of these non-ageless buildings around it. every single building in these 2 rows will get bonus for wonders. You can see it right here: bath wonder, barracks wonder, blacksmith wonder. So you can use wonders to give bonuses to any type of building, but like I said, try to prioritize culture and science. Now, the final thing you need to keep in mind is if your civilization is actually one that gets a unique quarter. So, for example, we can look at Rome. They get the Basilica and Temple of Jupiter, unique buildings, and together you place them on the same tile. Do not act like the AI and place them on different tiles. You need to put them together to create the forum. Now, you have to look carefully at their abilities because sometimes they get adjacency bonuses for things that are a little bit different than what you're used to. So here, Temple of Jupiter gets +1 culture adjacency for happiness buildings. So buildings do interact with each other when it comes to certain unique buildings, and specifically like Rome or the Abbasids. The type of building you put next to your unique quarter will matter, so plan in advance for those. Regular quarters do not have names, but specialty quarters are named because they have an ability. Regular quarters don't have an ability, only that certain things like wonders or social policy cards might give a benefit to all quarters. Okay, the final thing to keep in mind is that this is a very unique plan for the palace. Like I said, city halls do not get this +1 culture or science adjacency, but usually cities are going to be the ones building here. And then in that situation, you don't need to worry about the 6 rings. You can just find the best adjacency bonuses, but keep in mind they still have to be chained to other urban districts and then plan it that way. There are a few exceptions to towns. So towns can build warehouse buildings. They can also build altars, but usually they cannot build normal tier 1 and tier 2 buildings. They can also build bridges actually. However, urban centers can build tier 1 buildings, and it's a special town that you can sort of specialize as, but we'll get into that once we go over towns. And let me know in the comments below if there's a topic you would like me to cover. I would gladly do so. I love teaching Civ 7 to others. I'm really enjoying this game and I hope you are too. Thank you so much for listening, and bye.